I'm Libs, also known as Elizabeth. You can call me either one. I answer to both. I'm all over the internet, whether or not I'd like to be. So you can find my shop at libselliott.com. I've got this Sew Squad, which is the online community I have, and I've got monthly members there. And every month, almost every month, we've got a special guest who comes to visit. Next year, I've already got some amazing guests lined up, including Barushka and Andrea Sang Jackson and Tim Natar, a whole bunch of special guests. So every month we'll have someone come and speak, and that's just part of your membership. So it's a fun place to be. I live and work in Toronto, Canada. I went to college and studied weaving and natural dyeing, and I majored in cultural studies. I got a BA in cultural studies. Um, I've been quilting since 2009, and I've been teaching classes for about 10 years and designing fabrics for 10 years. And then also, I have a lot of tattoos, so I kind of stand out in the crowd. So people always recognize me, and I try to recognize them. So here's a bit about my quilt story. Okay, so this is sort of the background of how I came up with this whole process for designing a lot of my quilts. I grew up in a restored Georgian home. My dad was an antique dealer, and we would often go to auctions on Friday nights so he could bid on antiques for his shop. And the shop was attached to our house. And when I was really young, that was my first exposure to quilts. So we would go into these auction barns, and you would see these really beautiful quilts just hung all around the barns. And so that was the first time I really was introduced to them. And then also he would buy them for collectors, but also we would just use them around the house. So this is a really beautiful one that's I don't know, there's no label on it. So unfortunately, I don't know who made it, but it's got really beautiful, tiny little one inch half square triangles all the way around all of these blocks. And it's all hand stitched. And so from an early age, I was surrounded by all kinds of really interesting antique textiles, and I was drawn to the bright graphics of all the quilts that we had. We also had them hanging up on the
Hmm.
walls in our living room. But even though I grew up in a place that was all filled with antiques, I also really love modern design. So I'm also really drawn to like minimalist, simple lines like this house. It's called the Stall House in California. I love the simplicity of it, right? It's just the paring down of everything. So there are really two parts to the things that I love, whether it's very eclectic or very simple, right? I love it all. It's hard to pick one thing, you know? I also love really cool fashion. So I was going to wear this outfit on the right, but I decided not to today. It's a little chilly. Um, but this is a designer named Iris van Herpen. She's a Dutch designer, and I highly recommend you look up Iris van Herpen. She works with other creative technologists and scientists and things to come up with these really interesting um, pieces. They're like pieces of art for your body. That dress on the right-hand side was probably one of the first 3D printed dresses. And it's really very cool. But she bases a lot of her work too on organic things and nature. So you'll see an influence of, I think she's had collections where, all those crazy little creatures in the deep sea. Well, she'll take, and bioluminescent creatures, she'll take that inspiration and make these pieces that glow and move like they're underwater. It's fascinating. So I really love the way she took technology like 3D printing and laser cutting and started using it to make fashion pieces. So I started quilting part-time just for fun when I was working in advertising. And I'd made a few quilts, like I did a sampler quilt. I learned the basics of, block making, and it was really enjoyable. Nice way to relieve stress after a long day at work. But All the quilts I was making were pretty repetitive, right? Repetitive blocks, one or two blocks in repeat. Interesting, but it didn't feel like me. And so I wanted to do something a little different. And so let's talk about the characteristics of generative art before I jump into how this happened. So, generative art is all about controlled randomness. So, instead of manually designing each element, artists create a set of rules, often, but not necessarily using code, algorithms, or mathematical formulas that guide the system in generating the artwork. Think of it as setting up a framework and then letting the program or randomization tool do the rest. Right. And today that's what we're going to be doing, but we don't have to use a computer to do that. Also, if we want to, I'll just touch on AI. AI is a little different from what I use because the code that I use is closed. It's not on the internet. And how do I explain this? With AI, you would potentially be making something generative if you're giving it a set of prompts, right? The AI tool is using the rules that you're giving it and then spitting something out back to you. But I do that with a piece of code that is on my computer, so it's like a closed source. This is Joshua Davis. He looks very cool and young here. I think we've all aged a lot, but sometimes I try to use our cool photos. Josh is a digital artist. He's been making digital artwork for many years. And so he's used computers as his tool to make his artwork probably for, I don't know, he would know better than I do, 30 years. Um, and Josh is a good friend of Hugh's. And Josh makes really incredible work. These are just some examples of the work that he's made on his computer. So when I started to see these things, I was like, ooh, these are kind of quilty, right? Like some of them, not so quilty, but really beautiful, really ethereal and amazing colors. So these are some great examples of his work. So one year, listen, he was not usually here when I do this talk, so he's going to find out how I felt for real. But one year, Josh took Hugh to Japan for fun. Josh was doing a talk. He took Hugh away. They had a great time, left me with the 2-year-old to take care of for 10 days. When Hugh got back, he was like, I wanted to thank Josh for taking me to Japan. So I told him that you'd make him a quilt. And I was like, what? Wait, I didn't get to go to Japan? I was like, that's a lot of work to like offer a gift to somebody that you don't even have to make. But also, I thought it was a great challenge because Josh is this really interesting artist. And so I thought, okay, fine, challenge accepted. And so I designed this quilt and I wanted to make it look kind of similar to his work in colors that I knew he liked, but similar in that there's like this non-repeating plus sign, right? It's overlapping, the scale is changing. It's really, there's a lot of depth to it and movement. But so I did it on graph paper and it took a lot of work to get it out of my brain onto paper. And like my brain wants to, and our brains always want to have things organized, right? And symmetrical. And we want to pattern things with our minds. So it was extra challenging to get this onto paper. And then also, I was early on in my quilting journey, so I didn't know how to do the quilt math. So I cut like I think there's 220, no, 2,200, I should say, 2-inch squares to make this quilt rather than figuring the math out. So I kind of built it like a 9 patch. And then I would have I'd build it in rows. And my 2-year-old is running around the table. And I'm like, don't create too much wind because then it'll blow away and I can't get it all. So in any case, it was a great challenge. And Josh really loved the quilt. And so we decided, like, let's do a collaboration. So he started to make these on the computer. And I said to him, like, when I was designing your quilt, it took so much work for my brain to get it onto paper. And maybe there's something you can do with your computer to help me sketch more quickly. So with these early pieces, I was just pulling colors out of a bag to randomize the patterns. And so I showed him in response to what he'd done on the computer, look at, I can do this by randomly just pulling colors out of a bag. Uh, and it was fun, but I was like, I would like to have something where I can do a little more planning, but also with a little chaos involved. And I was using a lot of solids because just wrapping my brain around the process was difficult enough, and um, it gets pretty busy with a lot of prints. So I just thought, let's just stick to solids. And here I've used one print to see, what happens. So Josh told me about this new program that had come out called Processing. And it's a programming language. It's a Java-based language. And he said, I'm going to write a piece of code for you. I'll show you how to use it and how to manipulate it. And let's work together to figure out what quilt blocks you want to put into the code. So we drew some pretty basic quilt blocks. And again, today you'll see a lot of the blocks are straightforward and pretty traditional quilt blocks. These graphic, like geometric ones, tend to work the best. And so we started with this. And then he showed me how to do this. So with code, and I'll show you the code itself, but I could set the colors and the grid size, and I would run it. And within seconds, I would get a result like this. And then if I could change the scale of the blocks too, the blocks you can see they start pushing each other out of the way, overlapping, and creating this really interesting negative space. And then I took the outline away because this is what it would look like as a quilt, right? And then I finally chose one. I saved probably 100 of these different designs, and then I chose one and said, okay, I have to actually make a real quilt out of this now. So I chose this one. And then this is back in 2012. I printed it out on a piece of paper and drew a grid on it, and then started to make it with blocks. I think these are all 6.5 inch, like 6-inch finished blocks. And I didn't know how to piece them very well, so I used freezer paper for every single block, which was time consuming. And I'm so happy I moved forward in my journey and learned how to do the math. Um, but this was the result. So this is the very first quilt ever made using a coding language, which is pretty cool. And I still own this one. So the results were great, and I got lots of attention on, I guess it was on Twitter at the time. A few different tech blogs wrote about my work, and it was really pretty cool to find this new way to take something like traditional quilt blocks, but use a new tool and mix things up a bit and make a whole new aesthetic out of it. So after I made that first one, I said to Josh, do you mind if I keep making these? And he said, no, like go ahead, play around, keep going. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 13 years, in addition to a lot of other things like designing fabric and whatnot. Yeah, this is the one thing that I still really love to do. And I just had a show too, and I'll show you the results of that show where I did 13 quilts for 13 years of doing this. And unfortunately, a lot of these quilts were commissions from, people who are interested in buying a piece or from interior designers. So I don't have them anymore. They're out in the world. I mean, part of me is sad, but part of me is excited because I know they're somewhere out there, having a journey. And I'm always curious, like what's going on with my quilts? Are they being loved? I hope so. Are they being turned into quilt coats? I don't know. Who knows, right? I won't complain. I'm just happy they're out there. This is me when I was younger and I could get down on my knees to baste quilts on the floor. This is not a thing I do anymore. But I had four quilts to make for one person's home. And so I managed to get through all four pieces. And so the fun thing about this is that every single one is different, right? Every time I run this code, I get a different result because of the combinations and all the potential, what would you say, permutations. You'll never get the same result twice. I also participated in some interior design shows like the Toronto Design Show and the New York Design Week a few times. And it was a really great experience to stand and have to talk to people. I'm an introvert very much. I think a lot of us who quilt are kind of, well, not everyone, but like kind of shy. So it was challenging, but really good to have to stand and talk to people about my work and what I was doing. Over time, I got more confident about it. And it was interesting to see people's reactions to, oh, this is a quilt? Quilting? I hadn't thought about quilting. And I'm like, why? Quilting is amazing. So it was great to like get my work out there and show people what quilts can be, and how much work goes into them. So these were for a New York Design Week, I think 2017. And then finally, somebody said to me, I love your quilts, but I don't want to buy one because I am a quilter. And I was like, what? There are other quilters in the world? Like, I didn't know there were guilds at the time. I knew there were other quilters because I'd taken, workshops. So I knew there were some people out there. But she said to me, you should write a pattern. And I thought, oh, okay, I didn't know people just did that. Anyone could do that. So I wrote the Rebel quilt. And I think it was back in 2014. And since then, it's been like one of my best-selling quilts. It's my I would say, most Libs quilt that I have out there in the world. And it was really fascinating to see people making it and choosing their own fabrics and making it their own. It's like then we're collaborating, then we're doing something generative together. Like I'm giving you a set of rules, but then you're adding in your own color choices and fabrics. Maybe you're moving some of the blocks around. And so it's like this really cool collaboration that happens. This is another one called the Deadly Rhythm Quilt, another pattern, and it's like just one block. But because of the way it's randomly filled in with colors, it's got a lot of dynamic movement to it. This one is the Weight of Love, and it's done with hexagons and Y seams, lots of Y seams. And also you'll notice that I used Essex as the background and then I washed it and it had been a square and now it's a rectangle. So I learned my lesson that you should pre-wash anything that's got linen in it. Whoops. But in any case, it looks really pretty and it's a pretty cool hexagonal quilt. This one's called the Paradise Quilt. It was like a quilt that came out with one of my fabric collections, and it was a free download. And I think I've got it in the Sew Squad now as a download. I'll have to double check and make sure it's there. But it's a really fun and pretty one where we use like warm colors and cool colors and then black and white in the corners to create this really pretty quilt. That's quite old. I think it's from 2016, maybe. We are the storm. We're doing a storm along in the Sew Squad. We haven't had a meeting for a little while. This is a mega English paper piecing project, and it's all hexagons, and there are some half circles in there. It's a big challenge. One person has already finished. Oh, maybe two. Maybe Brenda has also finished. But it's pretty impressive to see people actually working through this quilt. Yeah. And also, this one is available if you go on quiltink.com. It's a great place where you can color patterns, and this pattern is there so you can like color it yourself and see what happens. It looks very different in solids compared to prints, but poof, it's an epic multi-year project. This is another one called La Fin du Monde, and it's a heart shape with similar blocks. A lot of these blocks are ones we'll be using in our chaos quilts. And then just here's some other cool designs that haven't been made into anything yet, but I've got thousands of renders on my computer that I save, and sometimes I'll go back and I'll think, okay, it's ready to be fabric or it's ready to be a pattern. Let's do it. This is another small piece, and it was an animated piece that the triangles bounce around your screen. And so I took a screenshot and then I projected it onto the wall at scale and drew it on foundation piecing, or sorry, freezer paper, and then made it into this wall hanging quilt. So it's not huge, but it was a cool, fun process and fun to like piece in some stripes and see what happened there. So, and here's some more of these experiments. Some of these might still be in the WIP pile. I have a feeling this one is sitting somewhere in a closet. And then I've also done people generated quilts, right? Because another way to do these randomizations, so called, where you don't know exactly what's going to happen, is to just have other people make blocks for you, right? So I think that happens a lot with, when you see someone doing a quilting bee where maybe you're given a prompt and each person sends a block. Um, that's really cool because you never know what you're going to get. So again, I would say I would consider that generative, right? You're setting some rules, setting some parameters, but other people are making the blocks. So I had some kids do this at New York Design Week one year, and I spent a whole week having people make blocks and put them up on this design wall. And then we ended up with this really cool looking quilt called the Unity quilt, which is still here. It's in a bag, but it's a really beautiful quilt. And the only control that I had with this is you can see the top blocks, like the background squares that I pre-cut, are in rainbow order. So everything on top is just, chosen by the person who put the pieces on top. But I kept the background blocks in rainbow order, so there'd be some control, right? And then I did it again for a class, for a graduating class, and they all signed their names. I added a little panel, and they all signed their names in fabric markers to hang on the wall. And then there are teachers around the world who've done it this sort of process using paper. So there was a teacher in California named Don Mass, and he wrote a whole blog post for teachers on here's how you can do this project with your kids in your classroom. And it's accessible to kindergartners right up to grade eights. And so once in a while, I'll have a teacher from somewhere in the US or Australia or overseas who will say, like, oh, my class did this project, and they'll send me a photo, and it'll be very cool, like this one, where a whole school did the project and made this really beautiful paper quilt. And here's another one, just all black or red, white, and blue and on point, which I think is really interesting. And I love that they sort of cut out almost like did the snowflake thing and mounted those on the papers. Really beautiful. And then corporate work, I did a bottle for Absolute Vodka. I have one of the quilts here still, actually. And I had to make three of these quilts to go with the bottle. But this was a really interesting, amazing project. I think this was one of my favorite, it was definitely my favorite corporate project. And it was a limited edition bottle. And the quilts were a lot of work to make, but really fun to make too. And Absolute was an amazing client to work with because they just let me do what I wanted. It was very different because I used to work in advertising, and some of the clients we had were very, I don't know, I don't want to say conservative, but you know what I mean? Like they're a little more nervous about doing anything wild, and Absolute is just like go for it. So they were a really fun client to work with. And there's the bottle. These are just limited edition and they were only made in Canada. I think there were 10,000 of them, maybe. My parents, I think, bought half of those. No, but but it was a really great project to do. And then this is for the 2021, the Holt Renfrew holiday campaign. So it's a high-end department store in Canada. And so I created this quilt for them to use in their marketing. And then this is the latest project that I just finished. And it was for the Carrefour um, quilt show in Alsace, France. And it's 13 quilts. I've shared it on Instagram, so you can go and have a look if you haven't seen it already. But it's 13 quilts, and the rule for this in the code was that each quilt would have one more color. So there are 13 colors total, not including the black background. And so each one has one additional color, all the way up to gold. And some of them do have like the color that's going to be in the next quilt. It's got a little hint of it in there, so it kind of carries through. But I wanted these quilts to look like one, almost one big, long succession, right? So I have a little bit carrying through, and also I faced all of the quilts so that you don't see binding edges around them. It was a great project. I'm happy to be done. Whew. But also I really loved it. So yeah, I was really happy to see the final process. So let's talk about kaleidoscopes. I'll show you some examples of those that I've made. This one is called the Orbiter quilt. It's a big, beautiful, fun quilt to make. And you can see it's the same quadrant 4 times repeated. This one is the bloom quilt, which I showed in the very first slide. But there are various ways that you can make this quilt. I think there's 6 possible results with the pattern, but then you can also tweak it and make it a little bit more your own. This one was called One Good Thing, and it was a block of the month we did a few years ago. And I think I've got all the block of the month tutorials and everything in the Sew Squad still. So if you are a monthly member and you want to make this, all the block patterns and video tutorials are in there for you to go ahead and peruse. But this was a really fun one to do too.